What's up, all? This little video here is going to be kind of a, I don't know, crash course beginner intro into Emulation Station. It's not a setup. I'm not going to show you how to put it all together. There's plenty of videos on YouTube that you can go that do it better than I can. They have everything, all the resources already, dialed out ahead of time, and they kind of have a great step-by-step of exactly how to set up Emulation Station with RetroArch. This is kind of a precursor to that of explaining exactly what Emulation Station is and RetroArch and how it works together. I've had a couple of questions come in now asking, will PS2 work on RetroArch? And then other people are asking, how do I get other emulators to work and stuff like that? And how does that work with Emulation Station? So I figured I'd kind of provide a little bit of information that I had to learn on my own as I was jumping into Emulation Station and emulators and the ROMs and all that kind of stuff. If you already know everything about this, it's going to be pretty redundant. So, skip to the next video or do whatever you want to. But who knows, maybe I might provide a little bit of information from my side that you might have not known, or it might plug in a piece or two that you were just a little confused about. So, you have Emulation Station. Here you can see my desktop, and I'm just going to show you little icons as examples and everything, You have Emulation Station, and that is your front end. Emulation Station itself doesn't actually run anything. It's just its own little program, and it points to what most people set up as, and what I like to set up as, is RetroArch. RetroArch is the backbone that actually plays most of your ROMs, your games. It's the emulator. In RetroArch, it doesn't say emulator, they are cores. If you're familiar with Dolphin or PCSX2, which is the PS2 emulator for Windows, and many other platforms too, that's another different type of emulator. RetroArch is the system that kind of compresses a bunch of those cores or emulators all together in one suite, and can almost be its own front end on its own, because you can actually start the games from there. However, it's not super friendly as graphics and box art and metadata and even maybe trailers or something like that with some front ends actually provide. So the makeup of this is that you have Emulation Station. Here's our folder with Emulation Station in it and our settings and all that. Under Systems, you have RetroArch right here. When you start Emulation Station and you click on a game, it goes in and it tells RetroArch, please start that game. So it's like a system behind the system, so to speak. Hopefully that kind of clears that up a little bit for you of like how this actually works. So when you push the buttons to play the game, like you're actually playing Mario, you're playing it in RetroArch. You're not playing it in Emulation Station. So maybe that gives you a clue as to how these kind of piggyback off each other. To kind of deep dive just a little bit more into how that's accomplished is when you start putting together Emulation Station with RetroArch, you're going to have to configure your system's configuration file. This is where some people might shy away from this a little bit. It might get a little overwhelming because it's not a point and click graphics, type thing, a nice GUI. It's just this pad, of stuff. But it's really not. Once you start looking at it, it shouldn't be too overwhelming. It's pretty straightforward, really easy. You're not coding or anything like that. You're simply just making adjustments based on a text file. And the only scary part, if you even want to call it that, is that when you get into things like this, the naming conventions have to be extremely precise. You can't have an extra space in things sometimes, or different parameters have to be just right, and if they're not just right, they don't work at all, And so that can get a little cumbersome and tiring. However, look it up on YouTube. There's plenty of how-tos, and you just download their package of systems and all that. So if you take a look at some of these, we've got like Sega Genesis highlighted here, and then below is the extensions that this game is available to play, or that you're telling Emulation Station these are the extensions that you should be looking for when you look into that folder. So I have all my Genesis games zipped, and so I added the zip extension in here. As soon as I did that, Emulation Station saw all of my games. You know, the second part is, will RetroArch be able to play those games if they're zipped? Super easy to figure out, and all that stuff. But as that's an example, you can kind of see how that works and how that plays. One of the questions I saw was, will RetroArch play PlayStation 2 games? Not that I know of, because unfortunately they don't have a core for PS2. It needs BIOS, it needs different things, it needs a graphics engine and all that. I think that's kind of beyond what RetroArch can, do. They'd have to tool in a lot more stuff into RetroArch to be able to cover that. So, a great example of how Emulation Station really is working in the background. I think I can just type in PS2. Yeah. Normally, you see these paths of where you're going to actually call for the game to start. So in PlayStation 1, there is a core in RetroArch, and here you see RetroArch right here. Call RetroArch, and it calls the core to start that ROM. And PlayStation 2, of course, we can't do that through RetroArch. It's super easy to change. All you do is you keep the parameters the same. And I'm going to kind of flip back and forth on my monitors here. In this folder is all the other emulators that you'll need to run other different things. And you will designate where that is and how it's named, in these things. So for my PlayStation 2, I have PCSX2 in here. And then what happens is Emulation Station, instead of starting RetroArch and starting a core, starts this PCSX2, and there's no other parameters that are needed. So basically it takes the ROM, you click on the ROM in Emulation Station, and you're basically saying in this configuration file, every single time I click on a PlayStation 2 ROM that comes from this folder, I want you to start it with this program. That's all that really happens. So as you jump through different emulators and stuff like that, you can customize and make your own decisions on what you would like Emulation Station to start up when you start a game. RetroArch is very easy and simple, but that might not be your go-to. You might want something different. For example, I had a really hard time getting Sega CD to work correctly. And so what I did was, instead of fighting and struggling with RetroArch a bunch, I just downloaded the Fusion emulator. And if you're familiar with emulators, it's a very, very popular one, the Sega Fusion one. And so instead of, let's see here, where'd my Sega CD go? I think I lost it already. Here, Sega Mega Drive, same thing. Here we go. It's fine. It's the same example. Instead of it pointing to RetroArch like the Sega 32X is, this is now pointing to Fusion. So now, instead of going to RetroArch, it plays with Fusion. Starting to repeat myself here. So, but hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of like where these things come from and how they're put together and where they play from. Knowing these types of things from my perspective made this a whole lot simpler and a whole lot easier. I got the concept of, these are super easy and you can manipulate these at any point. All I've got to know is the file path of where this exe sits, and I can point all my ROMs to go to there. You don't have to use RetroArch if you don't want to. Every single one of these systems could be a different exe emulator that you've put together. However, I think with the glory of the internet and people making YouTube videos and all that, a lot of work has been done to help kind of, find the easiest way to do this. And RetroArch really does. You install RetroArch, you get it set up, which doesn't take that much time at all, and all of a sudden you have 6 or 7, up to maybe 16 different systems already configured for you. That's really nice and convenient, as opposed to downloading a Dreamcast emulator and then downloading a Sega emulator and just going through all of them individually. So and that's about it. So you can really use Emulation Station as the front end to start really anything you really want to. And as simple as this is, you can go a whole lot farther and start starting up other things other than emulators and ROMs. It's just basically a front end system that's got graphics on it to tie one file to start with it at the exe executable. Is all it really is. So hopefully that gives you guys a good round ballpark idea. I don't think that if you want me to do a tutorial on how to put it all together, I could try to, but I guarantee I've learned from other people. So I feel like going back to the original source is so much better than me just standing on the shoulders of other people and telling you what they've already told me. So, all right, if you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know, and maybe that will be the next video. Thanks.